Hi there, my name is Mark Ias and welcome to my pandemic lockdown video number 9, part of my Elders Corner offering. And this video is entitled, My Rights, Your Rights. And this is keyed from a scripture in 1 Corinthians 8 verse 9 that says, Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block. So why a discussion about rights? Well, it seems like everyone is talking about rights and how they're practiced. This is a big discussion in the US and I think all over the world. I think the discussion of rights is what has resulted in the demonstrations about racial injustice in the US and even the storming of the US Capitol on January 6th. I think some people thought their rights were being violated or maybe in danger of being violated, and they felt like they had to say something or do something. And there are people who think that the motivations for those demonstrations and the storming of the Capitol were overblown or inflated, and some think that it wasn't enough. But before we argue about the facts or the misinformations that might have led up to these events, I think we can agree that all sides are fighting for their rights. Now, I don't want to pick sides for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I don't think I'll adequately represent all sides, and I'm likely to not get it done to everyone's satisfaction. Secondly, I want to talk about rights and not about whether or not the reactions were fair. Everyone wants to make sure they're heard. Everyone does not want to feel dismissed. They want to feel like they're considered and they're responded to. And here's the big question and challenge for this video. Are you willing to give up your rights so someone else can have their rights? So a big starting question might be, well, what are our rights, or which rights are correct? Well, there are several statements of rights, and in the US, where we have the concept of rights drilled into us from when we're very young. It's a cornerstone of our national history. The Declaration of Independence has this phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Depending on how you grew up, it might also be drilled into your head that those rights are not applied evenly, and hence the racial inequality discussions. The US Bill of Rights is actually the first 10 amendments or edits to the US Constitution. Those 10 were certified at the end of 1791. So the Bill of Rights has been in the US for over 200 years. You're probably familiar with freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, pleading the fifth, that phrase. But there are others, they're not as well known, but they still form the pattern of our existence here in the US, things like trial by jury, states' rights, from which we get the Electoral College, no excessive bail. As late as 1948, the UN created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been translated into like 500 languages or so. Article 1 would seem very familiar to you, even if you've never heard of this declaration. It says this, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And there are a lot of other things that aren't written down exactly that we think of as rights. They range from rights to frills. From the Hellenistic ideals, the Greeks, back before the time of Jesus, we derive the right to health care, the right to education, the right to participate in athletics, the right to entertainment. You have in the United States the idea of the American dream, which basically means that anyone has the right to succeed. In the 50s, practically that included a car, a house, and now it's 2 cars, big screen TV, a college education, a vacation. And there are traditional things that we think of as rights. In India, big weddings, big expensive weddings are just like expected In the US, you have the traditions of baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet, to quote a commercial. But getting back to the Bible, what does the Bible say about rights? Well, those documents, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the US Bill of Rights, and others have great ideas, but the Bible, interestingly, does not definitively list out our rights. Why not? You don't find definitive descriptions of things like freedom of speech. You do find examples of people bearing arms, obviously. The book of Leviticus does describe the use of witnesses, but not trials and juries or bail. Now, if you're interested in the Bible, if you claim to be a Christian, if you claim to follow Jesus, then knowing exactly what the Bible does say about rights and how Jesus deals with it, the subject of human rights, should be a big deal. So where does the Bible talk about rights? Well, in most modern English translations, the word rights doesn't show up a lot. There are some places, and to be fair, the concept is what we'd really be looking for, not just the words. In the Old Testament, you have this word mishpat or mizpah, which I am probably mispronouncing, but it is sometimes translated as rights. Mishpah conveys the idea of putting things back, restoring things to how they should be. But it really means to put things to rights. And the Old Testament refers to the rights of the firstborn, the rights of a married woman, the rights of the king, the rights of the afflicted, the oppressed, the rights of the destitute, the rights of the poor and needy. And now in the New Testament, this passage I referred to originally, 1 Corinthians 8 through 10, is a place where rights is mentioned a lot. Now, interestingly, that same Greek word exousia is translated as authority or power. And so, for example, Jesus has exousia to forgive sins in Matthew 9:16. Paul has apostolic exousia in 2 Corinthians. Pilate has exousia to crucify Jesus in the book of John, at least according to Pilate. So let's for a moment focus on Jesus's approach regarding his own rights, not the word. And we'll look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's crucified, and then we'll compare that to the specific passage in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. So in Matthew 26:39, it says this: going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Now, this kind of is the crux, pun intended, of Christianity. Jesus's model was that he was willing to give up the best of himself and ultimately his life so that others could have something better. Now, here's the question: what right is demonstrated in that passage? So let's read some of Paul's teaching from 1 Corinthians 8 through 10, and it's the same passage I opened the video with. We'll compare Paul's teaching to Jesus' approach. In 1 Corinthians 8, verse 8, it says, "But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall." 1 Corinthians 9, verse 4. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers in Cephas? Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? In verse 12, if others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Verse 15, but I have not used any of these rights, and I'm not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me, for I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. So Paul's teaching is a little bit more day to day. He's not at the point of death. And he refers to some things that are really not written down anywhere else, but they're assumed as rights, like food and drink and to marry and to be a full-time minister. But what is important to me is that it agrees with Jesus's model. Paul may have had rights, but his primary goal was to allow other people to have their rights, not to exercise his. There's a good summary of the thinking of Paul in the next chapter in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. It says, I have the right to do anything. Now that's in quotes. And then Paul comments, you say that, but not everything is beneficial. In quotes, I have the right to do anything. And then Paul comments, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. So what's the big idea of this video? As I said before, the question is, are you willing to give up your rights so someone else can have their rights? And I guess what I'm saying is there's a distinction that I think we struggle with. We are willing to fight for our rights. And I know that we didn't all demonstrate, but I bet you did talk about it. And you may not agree with the methods that this or that group used, but I bet you picked a side. But are we willing to fight for someone else's rights? Now, what if it means you will lose your rights in the process? Now, of course, if everyone acted that way, wouldn't that be great? But you can't guarantee that. What if it was only you? Would you still lose your rights so that someone else could have theirs? What if someone stole your rights and gloated and tried to make you look bad? Would you still do it? And that is the model that Jesus and Paul held up. Are you willing to submit yourself, your time, your money, your life for someone else? This is the defining thing about Jesus and demonstrated in his crucifixion. The big idea of saying you follow Jesus is to be willing to do anything so that someone else can have their rights. Now, to really bring this home and make it more powerful, it wasn't some abstract idea with Jesus. He wasn't just dying for some future imagined vague fellow person. From the cross, there's this quote. Jesus is looking at specific people when he said in Luke 23:34, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Now let's again compare that model to something another disciple of Jesus said. And this is in 1 John 4:20. It says, for whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Jesus and his followers are not interested in ideal people, but real people. And the challenge with real people is that they may take the rights you're offering them and then sneer at you, insult you, and hurt you in response. So next time you're in a conversation where you sharply disagree with someone, and you have the presence of mind to decide you would act like Jesus, I understand that's a challenge. Maybe you could ask this question: what can I give up right now so that this person who is hurting me may have their rights? Can I give up my rights, my time, my money, my love? And so the big question, are you willing to give up your rights so that someone else can have their rights?